On today's panel episode of Bridging the Gap, we've got three special guests. We're going to be talking about decentralization, Elk, the token, what it all means. So if you want to learn more, stick around. All right, welcome to the Elk panel. We've got a few awesome guests today. We've got Baal, Elk CEO. We've got Greg, also known as Fox42, our lead content creator and wearer of many hats, as well as 0x Nick from both Elk Finance and Dragon Crypto Gaming. So welcome, guys. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me yet again.
Hello.
For my first question, I want to ask, what makes Elk different than other decentralized finance projects and other DeFi projects?
I think if I could start, if nobody else minds, I think what makes Elk a lot different than most DeFi projects is the love that they show to the different chains that they're on. Most of the time, it's not just as easy to pass off an advancement, going to a different chain, interlocking those different entities, which is, what is it, 19, 20 at this point? 20 now. So that's a lot of chains to kind of keep up with, right? And I think what Elk really does best is they keep those relationships very solid between those different chains. They make sure that that interoperability is as steadfast as possible. And chains typically have some issues from time to time, but Elk is really good at addressing that as fast as possible, shutting down the bridge to that chain if they have to, really if they have to. And that is very important when we talk about like exploits and stuff like that. So yeah, just great communication, I think, overall, and great partnerships.
With Elk being a bridge, first and foremost, or really it's a proof of concept bridge, they have started on so many different chains. Obviously there was the initial AVAX introduction, but the speed at which extras got added and new ones are being looked at, it shows a true desire to get to every single blockchain they possibly can. It's not a, oh, where should we go to next just because that's where the fashion is. It's an overarching desire that you just don't see from other protocols. They tend to follow fads. From my experience, you see them just randomly choosing a new chain, and it's not that we randomly choose them. It's that we have a desire and we have a need and we have it's a necessity for us to be truly interoperable and to provide interoperability. Then we have to be everywhere. So everywhere is where we're going to go for.
And what do you think, Baal?
So I'll give a slightly different answer, maybe more technical answer than the other two. 2 points. First, we're first and foremost an infrastructure project, which is definitely not what the vast majority of DeFi projects are doing. Now, it doesn't mean because we're an infrastructure project that we are only doing infrastructure, right? But it remains the first thing that we're doing, and that sort of makes us part of the plumbing. That makes us part of, the part that hopefully will be needed in the future. Whereas, typical projects can just come and go, right? Replaced by new ones that might be better, and so on. Now, that was point one. Point two is we're fundamentally looking at a really hard problem. So blockchain interoperability, right? And currently that problem has no proper solution. There are even papers, so academic papers, that are placing all sorts of limitations on what can and can't be done and what are the compromises to solve that particular problem. And that's what we're looking at, and that's what we're aiming to solve. Now, will we solve it? I think yes. Will we be the only ones to solve it? I think we'll be part of, let's say, the few that will try, and hopefully we'll be the ones to come with the best solution, or at least that's what we're trying to do.
Why is decentralization important? And of course, decentralization meaning if you shut one part down, the whole thing isn't shut down. It's in the hands of many. So why is that important?
I'll shoot for this one. We are working in the DeFi space, and it's part of crypto, and which has been used by Web3, and it's in response to the global situation where control has been taken away from us. We've subscribed to it. We've signed up to a myriad Web2 solutions, and they work really well. And everyone's having fun, messing around on the internet, using it for work, using it for communications. But it's very different, in my view, to the original concept of the internet and of the World Wide Web, where it was collaborative, where it was people sharing and people interacting in a more one-to-one basis, peer-to-peer. And as that's fallen into the hands of conglomerates and into the hands of capitalists, which is not a bad thing in so many ways, it has taken the control away from the individual. Right. And by putting it back in control, it's really hard to do without, but decentralization is looking to do that, because then we have multiple actors and anyone can be part of that network and be a contributor and also earn from it, but mainly contribute in a tangible and necessary way.
Great. Yeah, no, that's so true. The increasing, small percentage holding the greatest amount of power and kind of having everything one way, kind of back to the people. So, and anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Well, before Baal comes in with a much more technical answer than I would, I think I agree with Greg's point for the most part, and I think a real world example was our YouTube channel getting shut down for Dragon Crypto. That was about 3 weeks to a month ago. And it took us about a week to claw it back, because I think the issue was there's algorithms and bots that are running some of these Web2 services. And that's not a bad thing, because they sometimes have billions of users, videos, whatever. So it's understandable, but as Greg said, that takes the power away from the person. And if you're just starting out and you're trying to claw your way back up, it's very, very difficult when you have a centralized entity. So decentralization to me means that the little person has a real chance at success. And, that's kind of that's a deep thing, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I fully agree with the two previous answers that were given. I would say it's not just about safety, right? It's not just about taking back control, but there's also another component of it which is important. It's just ensuring that you don't go away, right? So if you're decentralized, if you're open source, fundamentally it means that you can use this product and you can trust that even if somehow, the company that's building it or the people that are building it, even if all of that goes away, you can still use it, right? And typically, if you're talking about a bridge, this is really, really important, because who's going to invest the time and effort in, building on top of a bridge if, tomorrow the operators can just say, well, too bad, we're just shutting down, right? And I think we've seen that happen a lot in Web 2. And unfortunately, I think we'll see it happen a lot in Web 3 as well, because decentralization was not properly, implemented and put into place. And it's really hard, right, to do it. But ultimately, I think the only projects that will survive, in the long run, are the projects which have this decentralization. Not necessarily today, right, but that have this philosophy that ultimately there is no other way for them to exist but in a decentralized fashion.
And it's probably a piece of the necessity for it to take hold, and probably, we probably won't see the proliferation of increased decentralization until maybe the next bull run, and who knows when that'll be. And going back to the last question here, what is one thing that decentralized finance as a whole is missing What's kind of, in everyone's view, a missing piece?
I would say it's missing simplicity. It's still at the nascent stages, and it's akin to when you had to take your telephone and put it on top of the mic and dial up and connect, and that was just a pain. And then your mum would say, "I need to make a call," and she'd disconnect you. That was the internet at the start, and it was a faff, and it was slow, and it was frustrating. And decentralized finance, in many ways, is at that similar kind of point. We need to be simplifying. We need to be making it easier. And quick plug, the UX team and the UI team are doing everything they can to smooth the process out in terms of how we can do that through bridging. And Baal and his tech guys are trying to make the infrastructure as simple but as secure as possible as well. You can do something very in a complicated fashion, but quite often simplicity will be more secure. I'm not entirely certain about the full logistics of it, but I should imagine in engineering that's very much the case.
For sure.
Yeah, and total credit to our decentralized application developers. You can check it out at app.elk.finance. Pretty sleek, little second plug there.
I would agree with the simplicity point, as well as the point of legitimacy, which is a rough topic for DeFi in general. But I figure that the trend that's starting to arise now is more business acumen, instead of just peddling kind of tokens to buy and then it collapses in on itself. So businesses that are popping up and showing legitimacy by registering themselves as businesses, owners being able to speak to the public and not hide. Like Baal has always been great at having, these roundabout conversations and everything else. Not roundabout, but these rounds of conversations with the team, with partners, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more of that, which is great. But the simplicity and legitimacy are things that are probably going to have to be worked on for DeFi.
So fully agree with what was said before. I think I'll give a slightly different answer, which might surprise some of you, but let me explain. I think it's missing regulations. By that, I mean, of course, ideally sensible regulations, which, don't prohibit everything, right? But rather sensible regulations that essentially allow us to build this ecosystem with sufficient certainty, as long as we're not, of course, funding terrorism or scamming people. And
Ideally not.
which obviously, the vast majority of builders have no interest in doing, but we just get the bad rap from the few, or maybe not as few as you think, but from essentially the minority that are doing that, right? So I've sort of used this analogy before, and I think it's really, really relevant here, right? Before cars could actually become a real thing, we needed roads, and we needed, rules for how you could drive on these roads. Once that happened, you had sort of the perfect layout, right? The perfect rails for mass adoption. Right now, we are probably 50% of the way there, right? And of course, there is a risk, as always, that we kind of, or some countries kind of fall on the wrong side and become way too regulated to enable, what we have in mind. And this is something which is going to be a big challenge in the future. But hopefully, and I've got my fingers crossed. Hopefully, this is something which is needed, which I have to be optimistic that lawmakers will recognize this and will actually come up with regulations which, and which probably will evolve over time, right? But which will enable us to build this, this whole Web3 adventure, and then hopefully, change the world, hopefully for the better.
And in a safe, secure, kind of accessible way, right? So, yeah, that's a pretty good point, and the cars and roads make sense.
Can I jump on the car analogy, because it just reminds me of when cars were first introduced in Britain. I'm fairly certain I remember reading that they used to need somebody walking in front of the car, blowing a whistle, saying pretty much, "Be careful, there's a car coming," which kind of shows the pace of the car, and it shows the cluelessness of people because they didn't understand it. Now, I wonder, are we in the car? Are we blowing the whistle? Or do we not understand it?
And that's kind of where we sit at the moment, in kind of that crossroads. Unfortunately, this is kind of all we have time for, but it's been an awesome conversation. And I want to thank Baal and Greg and Nick for taking the time to join and talk about Elk, talk about DeFi. We definitely look forward to chatting with you guys again. And, of course, anyone can join our socials, and which we will put up here on the screen. And you can, start off a conversation with any one of us in one of our public channels on Telegram or Discord or anything like that. So we really appreciate you guys, and thanks for tuning in to the viewers, and thanks for coming on for the participants.